Welcome back to the channel. We are back in the kitchen and today we are making homemade pierogis. Pierogis are actually super easy to make. It really just consists of a dough recipe and then a filling recipe, and today we're going to be using a potato cheese filling. There's lots of different variations. You could use braised cabbage, you could use onions, you could use lots of different things, but today we're just going to use potato and cheese because that's our favorite thing to use. So we'll get started with the dough and then we'll let the dough rest, and while the dough is resting, then we'll start making the filling. The filling is basically just like a mashed potato type filling, so it doesn't take very long to make. Cost-wise, making them is significantly cheaper, and of course they taste way better. So to buy a bag of pierogis from the store, you're looking at about $4. It usually has somewhere between 25 and 30 pierogis. We can make this recipe and yield about 100, but for that amount of pierogis, it's gonna cost us less than $2.50. So the math on that, you're already saving 3 times the amount of money just making them at home, plus they taste way better. Pierogis are also very easy to store. So once we have them all filled and made, we just put them on a tray and we'll freeze them. And then once they're frozen, we can put them in a bag and cook them just like you would from the store. But we'll get to that later on. So for now, we're just gonna start with the dough. So let's get started on the dough. First, you're gonna start with a bowl. I like to use a metal bowl. I just find the dough doesn't stick to it as much and it's easier to get out of the bowl. You'll need a fairly large bowl because we are adding a lot of flour to it. So we'll need a fairly large bowl because we are adding quite a bit of flour to it, plus it's just easier to work in. So grab a bowl, and the first thing we're gonna add to it is 4 cups of flour, and we're just using all-purpose flour. So we've got our flour in here, and the next thing we're gonna add is about a teaspoon of salt. Okay, so we've got flour and salt in the bowl, and the only other 2 ingredients we need are water and butter. So the dough for this recipe is super basic, 4 ingredients: flour, water, salt, and butter. So for the water and the butter, we're gonna actually warm it up on the stove in a pot, and you're gonna wanna warm the water and the butter just so where the steam starts to move around, where you can see that the water's warm but not quite boiling. So to our pot, we're gonna add 1 cup plus an additional 2.5 tablespoons of water, and then we're gonna add 3 tablespoons of butter, and the butter's gonna melt in the water as the water warms up. So let's get started on that. The butter's melted nicely into the water. It's not boiling, it's definitely warm. It's getting like little bubbles around the outside, but it's not at a rolling boil, so this is a perfect temperature. So we'll take that off and we're gonna add it to the flour. So we've got our butter and water, and we're just gonna pour it right into the bowl, and then we're gonna use a spatula just to mix it up until it starts to come together, and then we'll dump it out when we need it. So it's starting to come together now. It's really crumbly still, but I'm gonna dump it out on the counter and then I'm gonna start kneading it. The dough will be pretty stiff, so it's gonna take quite a bit of time to knead it. If you find that the dough isn't coming together well, and you've been kneading it for a bit and it's still not kind of clumping together, you can just add a little bit of water, probably like a teaspoon at a time, until you find it starts to come together. So the dough is starting to come together now, and this is exactly what it should look like. It's lumpy still, and it's not smooth and not elastic, so we have a long way to go before it's ready. Usually takes about 10 to 15 minutes by hand. Alternately, you can use your KitchenAid mixer if you have one. Again, I like to do my dough and stuff by hand. It's just a preference of mine, but you can definitely put it in the KitchenAid mixer with the dough hook until it's basically come together and looks like this, and then you can take it out and knead it by hand, or you can do the whole thing in the mixer if you want. So I've been kneading for about 5 minutes. You can see that the dough has come together quite a bit. It's still not ready at all. It's still very, very lumpy, but it's definitely starting to look more like a ball of dough. So I've been kneading the dough for about 15 minutes, and it's ready now to wrap up and let rest. It's a lot smoother, it's a lot easier to knead. It just feels a lot more elastic. So now we'll take the ball of dough and we'll wrap it in some plastic wrap and we'll let it rest for half an hour. And while the dough is resting, we'll start making our filling. So the dough is wrapped up and we're just gonna let it sit at room temperature and rest for 30 minutes. While the dough is resting, we are gonna move on to the filling. So we are basically just making like a cheesy mashed potato, and that's what we're gonna fill it with. You can use anything you want. Like I said earlier, you can use braised cabbage, you can use potatoes, you can use caramelized onions, you could use potato and onion, but today we are gonna be using potato and cheddar. So what we're gonna do is we are going to make some mashed potatoes and then we're gonna add cheese to it, let it sit and cool down, and then by then the dough should be ready and we should be able to assemble our pierogis. Potatoes I'm using are pretty small. They're kind of the leftover ones that were in the bottom of the bag. So that's why I have so many. You don't normally need this many potatoes, probably half this amount. So we'll go ahead and start by peeling them, we'll cube them, and then we're gonna boil them just as you would with any mashed potatoes that you make. To make the filling, this filling that I'm making is potatoes, whatever kind of cheese you like. I'm gonna use an old cheddar, and then butter, salt, pepper, and milk. Finishing up peeling the last potato, and then I'm just gonna rinse them off and cube them up, and then we'll boil them. Potatoes are washed, and I'm just gonna cube them up. I'm done cubing up the potatoes, so I'm just gonna fill up the pot with some water and a bit of salt, and then I'll put them on to boil. Should take about 10 to 15 minutes for the potatoes to boil, and then we'll move on to adding the rest of the ingredients to the filling. The potatoes are done boiling, they're nice and soft now, so we can go ahead and add the rest of our ingredients. I shredded about 1.5 cups of old cheddar cheese. We've got some butter, some salt and pepper, and then our dough is just about finished here. And I'm also gonna add some milk to it. So the first thing I'm gonna add to the potatoes is the butter. Since the potatoes are nice and hot, the butter will melt right into them. I'm gonna put about I'll put them all, 4 tablespoons of butter in. With the 4 tablespoons of butter, I'll add some salt and pepper. Just a preference how much salt and pepper you want. I usually add about a couple teaspoons of each. I'm gonna start by using this potato masher to get the salt and pepper and butter in, but I'm gonna finish it with an electric hand mixer because it fluffs it up and it makes it easier to scoop and put inside the pierogis. The butter and salt and pepper are mixed into the potatoes, so I'm gonna go ahead and add some milk and finish it off with the electric beaters. Once I've whipped the potatoes with the electric beaters, that's when I'll stir in the cheese. I'm done with the electric mixer on the potatoes, so they're nice and whipped up now and very smooth. So I'm just gonna go ahead and stir in the cheese that I shredded. The potatoes are still really warm, so it should just melt the cheese when I stir it in. Cheese is all melted in, so I'm just gonna let this sit and cool for a bit, and while that's cooling, we can roll out our dough and start cutting the shapes for the pierogis. The potatoes are cooling, so we're gonna go ahead and roll out the dough. You're gonna wanna lightly flour your counter just so the dough doesn't stick. The dough already feels a lot more soft. I also like to dust my rolling pin with flour just so it doesn't stick. You're gonna wanna roll the dough out to about 1/4 inch thick. And if the dough is too thick, it won't hold a lot of filling. The dough is done being rolled out. It's rolled out to about 1/8 of an inch. So we'll go ahead and we'll start cutting the circles to go in the little pierogi press. So I have 2 different sizes of pierogi press. I have a larger one and a smaller one. The smaller press is typically about the same size as the pierogis you buy in the store. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead and use this one. Last time I did use the large one and the small one, but I think today I'm just gonna use the small one. There is this tool you can get as well, which fits the large mold. So you roll it across the dough and it just cuts a whole bunch of circles that are this size. But since I'm using the small one, this cup actually is the perfect size for it. So we'll use that, we'll make a bunch of circles, and then we'll start filling and pressing our pierogis. Done cutting all the pierogis. So on our first round, we've got about 60, but we still have all this excess dough in between, so we'll roll it out again and we'll probably get quite a few more. I'm thinking around like 90. So you're gonna take your little circle and put it in your pierogi press. You do not need to use a pierogi press. You can actually just do this with your hands. Put a scoop of filling in it and just pinch it all the way around. This isn't necessary. I just like the way it crimps the edges. So you're gonna take about a tablespoon of filling, put it in the center, and then just close the press. And there's your pierogi. I like to take my pierogis and put them here on the tray, and then make sure that they're not all touching each other. Then you'll put the tray in the freezer, so they all freeze individually, and then you can just take them and put them in a Ziploc bag after and cook them the way you would cook store-bought pierogis. If you try and put them all like this in a bag, they'll just all freeze together into a giant clump. So you have to freeze them individually and then put them in a bag. I have 42, this will be 43 pierogis filled. If you are using the pierogi press or even just doing it by hand, you have to be careful when you're sealing them, because one side has flour on it from being rolled, but one side is flat from having touched the counter. So you want the clean side on the inside so that it seals. If you try and fold it the other way with the flour on the outside, it's not going to seal and you're going to lose all your filling when you cook them. Seals super easy with the clean side. I'm on the last pierogi of this batch of dough, so I'll just fill this one and then roll out the dough one more time and shake some more pierogis. The dough was a little bit dry when I picked it up, just from having sat on the counter while I cut the other ones out, so it started to dry just from the air. So I added just a teeny bit of water, maybe like 1/4 teaspoon to it, and now it's pliable again and we can roll it back out. So far on the trays, I have 60 finished pierogis, so I'm hoping to get another 30 or so from this ball of dough. Roll out about another 20 pierogis. So we're up around 70 so far. And I And still probably roll this out one more time and get a handful more pierogies. Finally done sealing all the pierogies. We ended up with 80. So I will take these 2 trays and I'll put them in the freezer, freeze them, and then once they're all frozen, I'll take them off the tray and put them in a bag and then just store the bag in the freezer. But before I do that, I am gonna cook a few of these now so we can see how they turned out. I'll cook a few of them now so you can see how they're cooked. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is get a pot of water on the stove. The water is boiling, so we'll just add the pierogies in. I'm only gonna cook a few. So once they start to float to the top, then they're done. The pierogies are floating now, so they're ready to come out of the pot. We'll just drain the water and then I'll heat up my pan and I'm just gonna fry them. You do not need to fry the pierogies once they're boiled. Once they're boiled, they're perfectly fine to eat. This is just a preference. I like to fry mine and then sometimes melt a little cheese on top or caramelize some onions with them. Today I'm just gonna fry them in some butter and then they'll be ready to eat. I like to use butter in the pan instead of oil. Oil can give like a greasy taste on the outside and sometimes makes them feel like they're deep fried. So those are done to my liking. I just like them a little crispy on the outside, a little bit golden brown, but still soft. So those are good, and I'll take them off. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you found it helpful. And now you know making homemade pierogies is actually not very hard. Let's try them. I just have some sour cream here that I'm gonna dip them in. But sometimes I like to dip them in homemade salsa too. They're so good. Well, I'm gonna finish these off. So that's it for today, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Protect yourself from the aliens reading your mind.
Is that my favorite? I don't know what to do with my hands. I never do. So let's get started on the dough. Oh no, I forget what I said. I forget where you can even pick up now. The dough is rising, so while the dough is, no, that's not it. The dough isn't rising at all, there's no yeast in it. The dough is resting, so while, okay, hello. If you're looking for an exact number on potatoes, I don't have one. They're a 2x2 square, but these are so small, I'll probably just, okay. Why am I like this? But I do end up using, to finish it, the electric hand whisker. What's a whisker? Whoops, I just threw a potato. Can I have that back? But since I'm using